So welcome to this episode of Better Run Orgs. This one is the rise of DevOps. So my name is Ian Gotts from Elements.cloud, and I'm delighted to say for this episode we have a guest, and that guest is Andrew Davis, who is from Copado, and he has literally written the book about Salesforce and DevOps. So he's got a wealth of experience which he's going to impart today. But before we get to Andrew, I'd like to just set the scene. The goal of any Salesforce implementation is to increase the return on investment. So Salesforce is obviously now a strategic platform in many organizations, and there's been a major investment, not just in terms of licenses, but in terms of the configuration, the training, and all the support that goes around it. But with COVID-19, the digital transformation has been accelerated. What was a plan for 5 years has now turned into 5 months or even 5 weeks. And as companies are still changing to make sure they meet the new demands, they require more business agility. And because Salesforce is the core platform supporting them, that means that we need to drive more rapid implementations of Salesforce to support that business agility. The risk, of course, is that rapid change raises risks. We all think about that quick fix that turns into be a very long fix because we have to pull it back out and try and solve the problems that it caused. So what we need is 3 things. We need to increase Salesforce adoption. We need to get more users using Salesforce. And there's a quick way to increase adoption. If only half your users are using the licenses which are purchased, if you could get the other half using those licenses, then we've doubled the ROI. But then let's think about those people who are logging in. Are they using the applications the way we expected? And could we improve that so that not only have we got macro adoption, but we've also got micro adoption? Those apps that we're building, even if they're logging on, are they still using the apps in the way that we expected? Or do we need to change the apps? Which leads us to the second point is we need to accelerate that implementation lifecycle. Copado did the state of DevOps, and it was very clear that faster implementations equals a greater return on investment. 10K Advisors did their project to program survey, and again, they found that those organizations that had a faster implementation cycle got a greater return of investment out of Salesforce. And all of that is underpinned by reducing delivery risk. Yes, we want to accelerate that implementation lifecycle, but we need to make sure that we don't break the org, we don't break the trust of our end users, so that we can actually drive faster implementations without causing any risks to the organization. So everyone talks about speed. We want to go around this implementation lifecycle faster. We want to go through analyze, build, deliver, and operate quickly. And I want to be quite pedantic here. Speed is about going fast. Velocity is about going fast in the right direction or in a given direction. So we believe that the analysis of what is really required, what the application should be doing, how we can change the applications to be that little bit better for end users. If we understand that, then absolutely we should be accelerating around this life cycle. But simply delivering more stuff faster is not necessarily the right answer. As someone said to me, the faster you go, the further you go in the wrong direction. So I'm delighted to introduce Andrew Davis. He's a Senior Director of Product Marketing at Copado. Copado is the market leader in DevOps, and he knows more about DevOps than probably anyone else in the business. He has had a fascinating career, both before Salesforce and at his time around Salesforce. And I would encourage you to go to Elements.cloud podcasts and go and listen to the podcast, the conversation he had with Alyssa Abbey on that podcast. Just fantastic fun, but also giving some real insights into why he's so passionate about DevOps. And as I said, he literally wrote the book on it, some 448 pages, which means that, yeah, it's not a fun read, but what's important is that everything in here is really actionable. So many times we read books which give you some high-level principles, but never get into the nitty-gritty and tell you how you should be doing it. And this book genuinely does that. So I'm delighted to introduce Andrew Davis, and I've asked him to start to give us some insights into the state of DevOps and how he's seen it changing over time. So Andrew, welcome to the Elements webinar.
What I'd like to do is just give you give you a brief overview of the mindset that I took in writing the book and where DevOps fits in. If that's not a term that's in your daily vocabulary, just give you a little bit of background on where this comes from. The reason I think most of us have fallen in love with the Salesforce platform is just that it makes it easy to build. Makes things like creating, database structures, page layouts, flows, logic, all of that stuff very straightforward. And they've really democratized the platform. They've made all of these easy to build capabilities, all the builder tools, really trying to push out free training to everybody, bringing tons of people into the platform who otherwise would have been locked out of the IT world. So that's very, very powerful. If you think about what you're building as like Legos, right? Everybody knows how to play with Legos, build Legos. You can build simple structures. And that's kind of what Trailhead does. Trailhead gets you started building all the simple structures, the individual components that can go into your Salesforce org. And then on the right, you've got Salesforce showing off their Salesforce Tower made out of Legos as the ideal state of what you could build with just these individual components, step-by-step assembling things. But in practice, in many cases, our orgs look a lot more like this, like a Jenga tower rather than the Salesforce tower. So it's really easy to contribute small changes, but it's quite tricky to figure out how can you get all of those changes to work together in a coherent way, in a stable way, without introducing risk. And what tends to happen, I love the 3 points that Ian called out. Yeah, adoption. Yes, you need to get them starting to use the tool. And it's not just did they log into Salesforce, but there's actually all these micro adoptions. Do they use this app? And every app has its own adoption metrics. Are people actually using what your team is building? And we also have found that that's the biggest ROI improvement you can get is build the apps that people want, build it in a way that they want. Everybody, when they first start out building in Salesforce, they're just learning. But once you've learned the basics, you can get to some pretty high speed of being able to build on Salesforce. But what tends to happen as you begin to accumulate more changes, this is my graph done with my hands in the air, as you begin to accumulate more changes, things start trending downwards, right? Because you realize you can't just ad hoc put things into the org without possibly messing up other things, without introducing some risk. And so that's why the speed tends to slow down over time, because people are trying to manage that risk, because the more complex your org is, the more risk there is in that practice. So if we look at the challenges, and these are the challenges that I experienced with the teams. I was a consultant at Aperio. These are the challenges that I was experiencing on my projects, that I was hearing from my colleagues, that drove me basically to spend many years focusing full-time on this topic. First of all, just on a human point of view, everybody only has a partial view of the situation, and this often isn't made explicit, but it's critically important, right? The executives at the top of an organization have a limited view. The business stakeholders have a limited view. The developers who are developing one particular component have a limited view. And if you've got a team of maybe 20 people collaborating on a project, business stakeholders, technical stakeholders, each of us has only a partial view of the situation. And that's one of the things that really makes it slow and challenging, because it's a lot to take in. We often don't know why things are the way they are. You come into an org and you see there's a lot of stuff in there, but why? Who put it in there? When did it change? Was it always like this? We don't have a history. Sandboxes, very quickly, if you're building in production, stop in most cases, right? There's most cases, Elements has a great blog article about go ahead and build in production only if it's safe, right? You need to identify the risk if you move your things to sandboxes, but immediately, as soon as you get sandboxes, you have the possibility that things get out of sync and you get what's called configuration drift, and entropy enters that system. Things get more different over time. Deployments are an enormous pain in the butt, all right? And when I first joined the Salesforce development team, I was the junior person. So what do you do with a junior person? You make them do the releases because nobody else wants to do it, right? So I would spend half of my Friday every day. I'm a consultant, they pay me well enough, and I'm spending half of a day every week just doing deployments, not creating anything new, just trying to get the stuff that everybody else built over into production. It's not value added time. It's a great cause of pain, you know, depression, wasted effort, wasted ROI, and so forth. And then changes cause unexpected effects. We haven't really operationalized the whole process of testing. There's a lot of risks, and then users do things we wouldn't have predicted, and the business, of course, they just want us to move faster. Why can't you move faster, right? You know, it's Salesforce. We got this platform, so, you know, you can just do everything with clicks, not code. Why can't you move faster? These are the challenges.
So Andrew, are these new challenges, or have they been around for a while, or are they on the increase? Can you give me some idea of, are there any trends on this?
So the challenges increase as the complexity of the system increases. And the reason everybody loved Salesforce and moved to Salesforce is because they moved away from a code-based world into a configuration-based world with these pre-built apps and so forth. Code, every single character in code adds some complexity. Every line adds some complexity. So when you have a code-based system, there's a lot of complexity, a lot of moving parts, a lot of things can go wrong. You move to Salesforce, a lot less that can go wrong. But Salesforce, of course, recognized the need for a platform. So as you begin to add more declarative elements, the complexity increases. Now they realized you can't be a no software platform in the real world. So 2008, they introduced Apex and Visualforce and so forth. You start getting code. Now you're getting Salesforce functions and Lightning components, and the complexity of the Salesforce platform is phenomenally great, right? But the maturity level in managing this complexity in the Salesforce world is very, very low. If you look at Java, right, they've been doing version control and continuous integration for decades, right? And Salesforce, it's 2020, and it's only in the last few years that everybody's been like, hey, we should probably start looking at version control. We should start looking at some of these methods to figure out what the heck's going on. It's basically it's literally like we've been building with Legos, but now the level of complexity we've built in our orgs is such that you actually need to hire architects and think about it like a professional.
So what I'm hearing is it's two things. One is the capability of the platforms increasing, which means we can do more.
That's right.
At the same time as the length of time people have owned Salesforce means they are building more complex orgs and understanding where else they can use it. So therefore the scope of Salesforce is increasing. But what I'm also hearing is that the principles of DevOps are late to the party, and therefore we need to accelerate people's understanding about how to manage around that implementation lifecycle.
That's right. Many of these things are solved problems. You think this is something that only you and your org are dealing with? Oh, why don't we know what's the history of things? These are actually solved problems, but they're solved problems in a different world, right? The world of broader IT, and we're needing to bring these solutions. The purpose of the book is to build a bridge between the DevOps world and our world today. I guess there's a couple of other things that are going on also, Ian. One is Salesforce is increasingly central to people's businesses. It is increasingly production sensitive app. It's not something that just affects the sales team anymore. So the level of risk of changes, the cost of risk is increased. One interesting thing that we found in Kopata's research is that we thought maybe the length of time you were in an org correlated with your performance, but we didn't find that to be the case. We found that performance was even for people that had Salesforce for 20 years, you still had high performers and low performers. And people in the first year or two on Salesforce, again, high performers and low performers. It really is very much just about the approach and the team you've got in place and how well you can manage complexity.
That's a fascinating insight. And I love that idea of solved problems. So we're not having to create things that are new and innovative. These are problems that have been solved in other worlds. We can simply apply those.
Yeah. So you had listed three challenges: adoption, which is a fantastic point, and then agility or speed, time to value, and then the risk. And taking the last two of those, on the vertical axis here, we've got safe. On the horizontal axis, you've got fast. And everybody wants both of those, right? Like the reason we moved away from traditional IT systems in your organization to Salesforce is because you were hoping to go faster than was possible on traditional IT systems, but also have it be more stable, right? You don't want to log into the system and just get a 500 error one day and you can't access anything in the whole system. Salesforce rarely breaks. It may have spot issues, but so that's our wish, right? But often we don't quite know how to get both of those at the same time. We know how to do fast, right? You just log into production, make your changes, and that is fast. That's as fast as you can get. But if you want to be safe, you need to develop in sandboxes. So you log into your development environment, you move it over to the test environment. If you want to be both fast and safe, you need to add another layer, and that's some DevOps platform, some layer of orchestration. So you make your changes in the development environment, you bring it into the DevOps platform, and you send it from there over to the test and production environments. And so that's really the missing piece if you want to be both fast and safe.
That's interesting because we started Salesforce using Salesforce in 2001, and the concept of a sandbox didn't exist. You developed in production. There was, when it first came, people were going, that can't be true. Yeah, in the early days, that was when also Force.com licenses were free, but that's a different conversation. But there was no sandbox. You developed in production, but then again, we didn't have very many users, and it was safe because it didn't influence very many people. I think now, as you say, it's now strategic.
If you think about a platform like Java, the environment, the development environments were already existing because they were your laptop. Your laptop is the development environment, and you can easily have a server that can run Java. And the tools to do version control and run builds and so forth for Java, they developed at the same time as the language developed. And so you're developing the build tools and the automation tools at the same time as a language. But what you find, and so they sort of all mature together, and so everybody else in the rest of the broader IT world, they've got all of these tools together. With Salesforce, though, you had Salesforce, the evolution of the platform going like this. Again, I'm doing a fantastic job of creating graphs in space with my arms, right? And then the execution, the development and testing environments are coming later, and the maturity of those is coming later. Even Scratch orgs came 15, 18 years after Salesforce. And then the evolution of build tools, that's coming later as well. So there's a big lag in Salesforce in terms of the capabilities to do DevOps. Okay, let me just walk you through this terribly complex slide, but hopefully it won't be too bad. So you take those two options, right? No process, you just do everything in production. That's option one. Slow process, where you have your sandboxes and so forth. That's option two. Why is option one bad? Because there's a high risk of failures. You add one validation rule and all of a sudden nobody in the company can do their job. That's why you don't do it in production. So everybody wants to make friends, right? Win friends and influence people. You lose a lot of friends, right? When you develop in production, you get dissatisfied users, you get people who don't trust your judgment anymore. And so we want to move away from moving in production. So you move to this slow process, you develop sandbox, move to testing and so forth. But here's the challenge you get there is that it's hard to deploy. Deployments are a pain in the butt. Change sets are the worst UI ever. Salesforce hasn't yet sued me for saying that. I've said that on many webinars. It's the worst user interface you could possibly imagine, change sets. When it's hard to deploy, what does that mean? It means you do it as infrequently as you possibly can. You basically postpone the deployments once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every month, whatever. Infrequent deployments means you have big deployments, sort of moving up there from infrequent deployments to big deployments. Big deployments means you've got a high risk of failure. Where you're deploying, 500 components in one go, something's going to break, right? That is a lot of complexity. Have you actually, with your big brain, analyzed every possible set of interactions between those 500 components and the live production data? No, nobody can, right? Too much change in one go. So you reintroduce the risk of failures. Or you can do it, but it takes a lot of complex coordination, which requires long testing cycles, which again slows down your deployments. And all of these things, when you have infrequent deployments, if you look here at the bottom, the consequence of that is you get delayed feedback. Right? You deploy once every month or two, and then people get the feature they requested 3 months ago, they get it 3 months later. And you get poor quality, that the features are not as usable as people want. And so you get that micro adoption that I mentioned. They might be on Salesforce, but they're not really using the feature that you requested them to build. So we tend to estimate that people only use about 30% of the stuff that you're building for them. Because the quality is not quite there. And so you need to be looking at how to increase your adoption. And so all of these things go back into dissatisfaction. And you get this, the world's best software platform, Salesforce, you've hired the world's best admins and developers and so forth, but you still have dissatisfied users. Some of that is coming because of these lack of clear DevOps processes.
I think that's also accelerated, though. If you say it takes 3 months to do a deploy or 2 months, the business is now moving faster than that because it has to, because of the rate of digital transformation. Yeah. So you may have built exactly the right thing, but by the time you've delivered it, the business has moved on. So it was right at the time they wanted it, but actually it's no longer right because now the business no longer needs that.
Exactly. And that's the same talk track as Agile, right? Agile versus Waterfall. We've all been talking about that for decades. But the thing is, Agile doesn't mean Scrum, right? Agile doesn't mean sprints. Agile means that you're agile. Agile means that if you need to make a change, you can make that change pretty easily, right? And so planning is definitely a big part of that. But actually having the tools where you can roll that change out or roll it back and you know what's happened over time, all of that is part of Agile. And the reason this matters, I don't know, developers have a really and admins, they have a very complex job. You're dealing with all this stuff. Your brains are full of all these complexity in the org that you're trying to deal with. There's not a lot of space to reflect on the impact that you're having on the organization. But every single customer that your organization has interfaces with other employees, such as customer support users or salespeople or customer success folks or whoever they are. Every employee in the company is interfacing with many, many, many customers. And those employees are interfacing with the apps that you've built for them on the Salesforce platform, like the customer service app. And you've got one small team, like admins and developers, who are responsible for building and maintaining that customer support app. The surveys we've done, there tends to be about a 300-to-1 user to dev or admin ratio in most organizations. So you've got about 300 users for every one admin or developer. It seems to be about the average we've seen. So the impact that your development team has and those apps have is exponential. If you think about every developer admin is rolling out changes that affect hundreds or thousands of users through the apps that you're building. And those users are then impacting hundreds or thousands or even, who knows, millions of customers, depending on the size of your organization. Your little team has a massive impact. And so if there's any inefficiency in the dev team's ability to maintain and roll out that application, that Salesforce application, if there's any inefficiency there, that inefficiency is propagated through the whole system, and that becomes an organizational inefficiency. And so that's not to put more pressure on the devs and admins. You're already under pressure. That's to say, hey, we need to take pressure off of you by freeing you up from doing low value work like manual deployments and laboring through change sets, and give you tools, processes, training, and so forth that enable your team to be optimally efficient, and that there is an ROI on your team's creative activity, your development activity. There's a huge impact on the organization. You're having a financial impact. If you're struggling to get budget for new people on your team, new tools on your team, and so forth, it's probably just because you've never quite done the calculations to realize the impact you're already having on the organization. And so that's, these days, after I wrote the book, I joined Copado. These days, I actually spend a lot of my week working through ROI calculations and just the financial impact of DevOps improvements for customers. So get in touch if that's something you're curious about for your team.
That's fascinating, because in the article we talked about developing in production. And by the way, not everything should be developed in production. What we're suggesting is those things where you know the risk is low and you can manage it. But we did a simple spreadsheet and said, okay, what if you take some of those changes and you only put them through you put them straight into production versus putting them through the longer cycle of multiple sandboxes. There is a cost saving, and we did a simple example. I think it was $375 saved in terms of dev time. And you go, well, Ian, that's interesting, but why are you wasting my time on this call talking about it? But then we looked at the implication on the end users in terms of they could make we'd simplified some screens so therefore they could be more effective. You only have 100 users who are touching that one page 5 times a day, and it would sound like a $60,000 value in terms of benefit. So that talks very much to this idea. And we only went as far as the service users, your yellow dots. We didn't then look at the implication of the customers and the customers' customers. So that $375 on the red blob turned into 60,000 by the time we got to your yellow blobs. So again, I think it's really important, this idea of you need to look outside your own role for that return on investment and look at the implication or the impact you have on the organization.
So it's something the business users are always saying, hey, just a simple change, why can't we do it faster and so forth. So I love that idea of assessing risk. And think about it like in terms of a customer support call. Let's say your time to resolve a call is 5 minutes, right? If you shave 10 seconds off of that, because you've put the right things in the right place, you're saving your support agents time. They can do more things, but you're saving the darn customer's time, right? So what's your customer's time worth? At least minimum wage, right? So calculate that, right? Saving the world some time.
Just riffing off that for a moment, people always talk about customer satisfaction, CSAT. And I remember talking to some Gartner analysts, a guy called Ed Thompson, who used to be the analyst in Gartner, who looked at the whole sort of customer experience side. And he came up with something which was about customer effort. So yeah, there's customer satisfaction. Did you get the job done? But there's a customer effort score, which is how hard is it to do business with you as a customer? How much of your soul dies when you go, oh, I've got to make a call to company X, and I know their processes are a mess, and I know they're not efficient, and it's going to take me forever, and I don't want to make that call. So that talks to that, how more effective could you make your customers, because you have the right information at hand, you can help them get through that cycle more quickly. So at the beginning, I talked about this idea of speed versus velocity, and we need to get around this cycle of analyzing the changes, what do you want to go and build, then how do you deliver it, and as Andy was talking about, how do I get it into the operate? How do I get the suggested changes that came from here? How do I get around this cycle more quickly? And part of this is saying that the analysis is really important to make sure we're going in the right direction. So business analysis drives DevOps in the right direction, but then an impact analysis of the changes you're going to make to the org increases the DevOps speed, but also increases trust. So this is really where the combination of Elements.Cloud and Capado comes to life. So what I want to do is just take you through very quickly a little scenario of a suggested change, and let's go around that whole cycle, and let's see if we can do that in about 10 or so minutes. So hopefully you can all see, you recognize this is a Salesforce page. It probably looks like some of yours. It looks like a CVS receipt. It just goes on and on and on. But at the top here, we've got, this is happens to be a custom object, but it equally could be a standard object. The difference, you can see some help there, but the difference is you can see some little purple icons. And if I click on the purple icon, I've got pop-up help. So I could see notes on how I enter the budget. Budget must be more than $1,000, less than $1 million. And then some links there to how I do budgets. Wow, okay, I noticed that there's 11 million here. And I'm assuming this is in, did that say it was in dollars or in, yeah, enter in US dollars. Well, I want to enter in euros. So I could add some feedback here to say, it needs to be updated to a currency field. Okay, yeah, +1. Yeah, I agree. I need euros, plus we need validation. Oops. We need spell check too. There we go. Right, so I've now posted a change. I'm an end user. I've made a comment right now. Hopefully that will work its way through to an analyst team and our dev team, and I'll do something about it. So let's go and pop into Elements for a moment. And here is a list of all the feedback that's coming in, some coming in from business processes, some coming in from, and there's that one associated with that budget field. There we go, there is the discussion. So I've now got a list of my feedback inside Elements that I can now manage. I can take them through, so I could either create a requirement or I could add it straight to a user story. And in this case, I'll add it straight to a user story. And I can see there are some user stories already created. There are 2 already there. So I'll add validate budget in US and add a non-US amount. Or I could add a new one, but I've just added 2 user stories. And wow, I can see that they're already being considered. So clearly those user stories are already being worked on. But I could add a new user story or add a new requirement. So I've already taken action on this feedback, but it's now linked to that budget field. I don't have to go and find the metadata item, it's already linked. So we're starting to build that institutional knowledge. So let's go and look at those user stories. And here's the user story, one of the user stories we were looking at. And if I go and have a look, we can link it maybe to the metadata items that we think need to be changed. There's the link to the object, there's the link to the field, there's a validation rule, another validation rule. So we're linking to existing metadata items. We can also add some documentation. So maybe there's a document there which is the initial scope. Maybe there's a URL linked, a link there to a process diagram, the two processes that are going to be affected. So you can map out the business processes inside Elements and start to link it so you understand the implication of those changes. So that's a user story. So I've taken you very quickly through the analysis phase. The question then is, how do I get this into Copado? Well, most organizations are using something like Jira, but to do that, it would be useful in the analysis phase for us to assess the risk level of this particular change. So we've got some fields here. We've assessed this as high technical risk, medium operational risk. It's not going to have a huge implication on the business. Medium regulatory risk, and the overall complexity is medium. I think it's 2 story points. But because any one of those is high, we've deemed this to be a high risk story. And if I click here, I can launch that inside Jira. It's linked to Jira. So if I now go to Jira, I can now see this has been forced from Elements into Jira. And if I open this little tab, everything which we saw inside Elements is now made its way into Jira. So we don't have a Jira ticket, but we have a Jira ticket plus all that other documentation. And I can now start to see that we've got links here to not just those systems, but we've actually now got links to the entity relationship diagrams. So again, we're taking this information from Elements from the business analyst team and making sure the developers have it so they have some more context. Now from Jira, we could then go into Copado. So now I'm in that same user story, and you can see there's the link back to the Elements story. And now inside Copado in this user story, you can see all that information again. Everything that came through from Elements is now here. Now, if I were back in Jira and the users, the developers wanted to go and add some more documentation, they could add that documentation inside Jira, and it would instantly be visible here inside Copado. So again, we're trying to maintain continuity of this documentation as you work your way through. Now, this is in a backlog status, and this user story is basically in dev. It goes from dev through to UAT in production. Now, one of the things that Andrew was talking about was the complication of managing things through the deployment pipeline. So part of Copado has a deployment pipeline vision here, or view, that says, okay, we've got 2 dev branches going into UAT or into hotfix, which then go into production. So in Copado, I can start to define my pipeline and manage those changes through that pipeline without the hard work of trying to create change sets. Again, Copado is taking away that pain, so you can manage those changes through in a very elegant way, but also making sure that you understand the risk. So how would you understand the risk of any user story? So let's go to the related items in a user story. And in the related items, I can see the user story metadata. And let's see if I can find that field. Let's look at the same field, that budget field. So if I open up the budget field inside Copado, so now I'm still in Copado. I'm now looking at how I push that change through, maybe to the next stage, through to the UAT. But I need to make sure that I've done some assessment of the implications of it. And again, now we have all the impact analysis from Elements now appearing in the right-hand panel for the budget field. I can look at field population by record type. I can see where this is used. So this is used in one formula field. If I roll over the formula field, it will tell me more about it. It's used in 4 page layouts. It's used in 2 validation rules. If I roll over the validation rules, again, it will give me more information. And we didn't find it in any of those places. So this particular field is not used in code. It's not used in field sets and so on. So maybe this is safe to move it, but it would be useful to understand if there are any other metadata items I need to include. So what else does this field touch? Not just that first level, but multiple levels. And we have something called the dependency tree, which uses the Salesforce dependency API plus a lot of our code. So I can now see that this field is used in a custom field called currency calc. And I can see, okay, so I can see that calculation, but because it's got a plus sign, I see that actually that has further dependencies. So that's also used in another custom field. If I just move this up a bit, when I clicked on that, it's saying this has got low usage, as it's only used in page layouts, but it has no data in it. So I'm immediately got some red flags there going, I'm not quite sure what's happening here. But again, that is also used in some page layouts. So if I'm making a change to this budget field, I may need to consider the implications on what happens to that report. Oh, and those 2 dashboards. What do I do with this custom field and those layouts? Now, I don't want to scare you. It's rather like Andrew's scary picture. But wouldn't you rather understand the implication of making those changes than simply make the change to that field and then suddenly find that those dashboards are wrong, that report's wrong, or another custom field bombs out?
Exactly. I want to double down on that. Let's say the developer went in and changed to support euros, right? And now all of a sudden you start putting euros and pesos and rupees and so forth in that currency field. But the developer didn't see all of the consequences. They didn't quite know where that number flowed to ahead of time. How long would it take the company to realize, euros are kind of close to dollars? You might go missing that issue for even days, weeks, months, who knows? But then to have this information at your fingertips, like I said in the very beginning, the biggest challenge is that nobody has the full picture. Nobody has all the information. So this basically creates that information as like glue and makes it, even the information about, do users like this or not? Are they using it? Are they filling out the field or not? All of that information, Elements is just like pouring this glue in that connects all of these different workers and provides this information consistently. Sorry, just wanted to rave.
No, thank you. I mean, I think that's a very interesting point. The fact that euros are very similar to dollars, that dashboard is driving a bunch of numbers. If you didn't change that dashboard and you simply reported a number, then maybe you're only off 10%, maybe you're off 20%. That will have an impact on the decisions that are being made. So I said that it's back to your comment about the developer has a responsibility to make sure that they're driving the business correctly. This field is impacting that report and impacting those dashboards. And the point about that is this view of the implications, the documentation, which user stories are being touched. This view is available against the metadata item here inside Salesforce, but it's also available inside Setup. So if I click on, let's go to a Setup page, which I'm sure you'll all recognize, but there's the budget field, and all that same information's here. So again, it's this idea of consistency of information. I've showed you it in Elements, I showed you in Jira, I've showed you inside Salesforce Copado, I'm also showing you inside Setup. So that's the development piece. Copado has a slew of capability to actually drive through, do conflict resolution and drive things into production. I haven't got the time or probably the skills to show you all of that. But let's just complete the cycle. So we've now made some changes and maybe we are now able to enter budgets in non-US. So there's a document that we've created about how you, well, I haven't created it, but there's a document which we've created with how you complete it in non-US. But what I can now do is say, let's make that available as help. So now let's make that available as help. Let me go back to where we first started, which is over here. And let me go and click on that budget field. And I haven't done a refresh. And now there's that document about how you enter it in non-US currency. And I can even rate it. Now that isn't very helpful. Clearly that we need to work on that. But you can see now how we've gone full cycle And I mean, I could now go back and do leave some feedback and says, new help article complete. And again, we've started the cycle of the end user giving immediate feedback. Now that feedback could get fixed really quickly. I could go back, go into that one, cancel that, copy that, go into that one. We'll say this is actually in euros. I now go back, updated. And I could even go back into there and that discussion that was going on that field, if I can get to it, we could go and resolve that. And then that means it's no longer open. So I've now taken you full cycle here of around that implementation life cycle of suggested changes. Really, we spent very little time on the analysis. That's what some of the earlier webinars have been about. But more importantly, it's the integration between us and Jira, us and Copado, to make sure we can accelerate that DevOps cycle.
And I like to think about this in terms of the information architecture, right? We're all very familiar with the Salesforce architecture. You can build this piece and that piece, and that's to try to help the regular end users of Salesforce manage their information. But the complexity of our Salesforce orgs is so high, right? And so to have something like this, like Elements, that provides that consistent information architecture across every different tool you're using, the setup UI, I like the Chrome extension is amazing. I love that it's in the setup UI, it's in Copado, it's in Jira, but then the user feedback, we're not hearing from users. We don't know if they're using it. We don't know if the fields are populated. There's such an information gap and such an information disconnect that basically the information architecture behind all of this is a little bit primitive for most organizations, and that's why your work is hard, right? That's why your job is harder than it should be, because you don't have the information. It's like, and it would take you so long to go, and how long would it take you to figure out, how many of those fields are being used in production? Like, is this field populated in production? Well, maybe you don't even have access to the production system, and then you have to ask somebody and run a report, and then you run it, and then a month later it's out of date, and the amount of time and energy it takes for us to try to figure this stuff out manually, like, oh, where's this used? Where's this used? Where's this used? It's just incredibly inefficient. And that's a lot of our jobs, right? And we've just kind of accepted it's like Stockholm syndrome, right? Where we're a prisoner inside all of this tedious complexity where we don't have the information we need to do our job. And we just think, oh, well, that's just the way it is. And that's why we get paid to be a Salesforce admin. I tend to think that the core skill of being a developer or admin is just patience, right? You're just more patient than an average member of the population. But
one of the things with Salesforce has accelerated and grown so quickly that the whole of this information architecture has really not caught up. It used to be called the happy soup. All the configurations all in the happy soup. That and the concept of an accidental admin or the accidental architect surely has no place anymore. We have a responsibility to be building strategic systems in a rigorous way as quickly as possible, to make sure that it supports the business. And I think that's the level of maturity that we're seeing some organizations are now getting to. But we need to, your book, the presentations we're doing, the books we're writing, the blogs we're writing is trying to educate the rest of the Salesforce ecosystem that there is actually a better way of doing this. And you shouldn't put up with the current situation you've got.
And some of these are solved problems. I mean, Ian, you've been working on this stuff for SAP and other systems for decades. Like, you know this works. It's working in other platforms. It's critically important, and it feels like just a public health notification. Like you're trying to tell people, wash your hands. It works.
Yeah, right? Yeah, absolutely. I've written that down. So these are solved problems. I think there are a lot of people that say they're making this up from first principles. No, this has been done. Kick to the key takeaways from this. The first is this idea of speed versus velocity. Yeah, we want to go fast, but we want to go in the right direction. The second, I think that Andrew, you and I have discussed that DevOps is maturing with enterprise-grade tools. It has matured in other areas. It needs to mature in Salesforce organizations. And that's the work that you, Copado, and others are doing to start to improve that. And we shouldn't forget that the reason we've got a Salesforce org is not so devs can play with it, it's so the business can work better. So we've got to be clear that the goal is not about how much clever stuff we can build, but how we can actually drive the business to be more agile. So a link of some resources there. Obviously, there's the Elements case study where we believe we have the best run org on the planet. So we put a lot of these principles into practice, and it's a long case study, maybe more like a white paper, but it does get into the detail of what you have to do. And all our development processes are freely available. Anybody can see how we work. There's also something we just launched, which is an implementation maturity benchmark. I know that Andrew's done this. It's 60 questions thinking about your org implementation maturity, making you think about how you go around that life cycle. And it gives you a report, and you can benchmark yourself now, 6 months' time, a year's time, but also benchmark against other organizations. Clearly, there's the integration between ourselves and Copado. You've watched the video, but if that went too fast, then you can go to the Copado page. And there's that article about developing a production, which is slightly emotive, but again, it's grounded in some solid principles. And the last two things which are critically important is, okay, if you have any interest in DevOps, go and get the book and read it. And fine, just buying the book isn't enough. You need to read it. And mine's dog-eared. I've read it. There are notes in the columns. So it's a working book. And the last thing I think is go to our podcast page and go and listen to Andrew's podcast with Alyssa. Again, it's just a fun listen to two people just having a great conversation.
Just thanks very much for everything you're doing on Element. When you're showing the book up here, I keep thinking, well, I didn't include the information architecture. That's sorely missing, but you guys are filling that critical gap, right? It's because it's a human problem. It's a human challenge, and you guys are filling that human challenge, helping with the processes and the feedback, the communication, the information. And I couldn't be more excited about what Element is doing, or encourage people strongly enough to get this as part of your system.
Fantastic.